Okay, so this is a video that's going to describe a correlational design that's looking at the relationship between the variables. Well, actually, let me back up and say the background of this was that students tend to say that they learn best in an environment where there's a lot of hands-on activities. And so instructors tend to lecture, and so we've got this issue where students are saying, but we learn better in a hands-on environment, and you're lecturing. So the research question is, to what extent do students learn better in a hands-on environment versus a lecture environment? So what I'm going to do is walk you through one potential version of that study. And of course, you probably can come up with many different ways to do this, and that's the nice thing about research. And that has to do with replicability, the idea that you can actually replicate findings by using different methods and different variables and different protocols. So this is one version. I'm going to tell you ahead of time that I'm leaving problems in this design, and I know it. My table is shaking. And I know it. So I'm hoping that as I go through this, you might be saying, but what about, you didn't control for this? That's a good thing. That's what I want you to do. In fact, you're going to participate in a discussion, optional, but a discussion where you do critique it. So you can kind of keep that in mind and maybe make some notes. Okay. So you got the research question. So my hypothesis, and I just did it with handwritten, I got to play around. Okay, so there's my hypothesis. So I'm saying that there will be a negative correlation between the two variables. And in plain English, what that means is that students who rate themselves high on learning in a hands-on environment will rate themselves lower on their learning in a lecture environment. And what I'm going to suggest, I'm not going to leave it up for a long time, because the nice thing about a video lecture is that you can hit pause and you can control my speaking. So what you can do, and I see a couple of people have joined me here, with the other video, you can actually pause it and write things down. So I want to keep the lecture as short as I can for folks. Okay, so I want to tell you that in order for me to come up with that hypothesis, I actually first had to come up with one in my head, and then I had to go and define my variables, and then I had to come back and revise the hypothesis to make it match my variables. So with hypotheses, even though when you read a research study, you see the hypothesis, that's something that people had to revise and come back to before they actually could make a prediction about the actual study, because you have to kind of come up with a protocol and then come back and make sure that the hypothesis matches what you say you're going to do. So that took some revision even before my alleged data collection. Okay, so then what I did was I came up with my variables. And so my first variable, and I think I'll just do it like this. My first variable, I'm gonna let it come into focus, maybe, hopefully a little. I'm not good at this dentist kind of thing. But what that says is how well a person learns in a hands-on environment. So that's the variable, the first variable, and I call it variable 1. And my definition of that variable is this variable is a self-report measure. So I'm going to ask the people to report how they learn in that environment. I'm using a Likert scale, and that's one of those, on a scale of 1 to 10. So I'm going to use a Likert scale on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is going to be none at all. I don't learn anything in that environment. And 10 is going to be that I learn very well in that environment. And for some reason, I can't get this to come into focus, but that's what this says. Okay, so that's the first variable. And the second variable, I don't even know if it's worth holding this up again, but the second variable, is it going to come in, is how well a person learns in a lecture environment. So it's, again, the definition is really the same as the other in terms of how I measure it. It's a self-report measure, and I'm going to ask the student to address that question on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all and 10 being very well. Okay, so those are my variables. My subjects, and I'll put it up here just in case it will come into focus. Okay, so you can see it. So the population will come from YVCC students who are on campus on the YVC campus. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get information from 100 students and these would be students who are walking through the hub. I'm going to get 100 students as they walk through the hub, and I'm just going to collect data until I get 100 students. So that would be students who walk through the hub and agree to participate. Those are my subjects. So my protocol, and I'm going to put this up for later when you can actually stop it. This is my page 1, and it's a little fuzzy, but that's there, and I'm going to walk through this. So for the protocol, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up with my research team, because you can't do it by yourself. I'm going to set up a table in the hub. I'm going to have ballots for students, and on these little sort of ballot-like things, data sheets, I'm just going to have 2 questions. The first question is going to be, how well do you think that you learn in a hands-on environment? And it will have a Likert scale right underneath it, and it will say 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And under the number 1, it's going to say not at all. Under the middle, kind of under 5 and 6, it will say adequately. And on the right, under the 10, it's going to say very well. And then the second question, it's going to be, how well do you think you learn in a lecture style environment? And it's going to have that Likert scale underneath, just like above. So the 1 to 10, and the not at all, and the adequately, and the very well. So then to recruit our subjects, I said that we would have a big sign on the table itself, and we would have somebody out sort of near the door who's going to sort of greet people and invite them over to the table. And they're going to approach the student and specifically ask, do you have time to answer a couple of quick questions? And if they don't, then you let them go. And if they do, you usher them to the table, explain what the study is and the purpose of the study, and then you give them a clipboard with a little ballot, and you have them answer the questions, and then they'll take their little data sheet, ballot, whatever, fold it over and drop it in a box where you're collecting the completed data sheets. On those data sheets, you'll have numbers in the corner that say either just number 1 or S1 for subject 1, and so you'll know when you get 100. Okay. So then, here's the back side of my protocol, and it's gonna, I'm not good at this. I should be a dentist. I shouldn't be a dentist, I mean. I'm gonna slide it up so it gets, it's not getting things in focus. Anyway, I'm gonna walk through this anyway. Okay, so we would man this table for as many days as it took to get to 100 students. The table would be up from 7 in the morning until 6:30 in the evening on all the days. Once we had our 100 data sheets, we would enter the data into an Excel spreadsheet. And you might not know that, but you can just say you'd calculate the correlation coefficient, which we call a Pearson R. With that correlation coefficient in hand, we would compare the correlation coefficient with our hypothesis. And in the hypothesis, if you remember, I said this would be a negative. I would be expecting a negative correlation. And what that would mean is that people who say that they learn better in a hands-on environment, so they rate themselves as high in that variable, will rate themselves lower in the learning in a lecture mode. So that's what I would expect. Now the flip side of that is, of course, that part of that prediction would be that people who report learning well in a lecture mode would also report learning less well in a hands-on environment. Again, that may not be the best hypothesis, but that's what I'm saying for the study. And then before we did anything else with those findings, before we published them, before we did anything else, we would have a debriefing after the fact. And what we would discover in that debriefing is that there were a lot of things in that that design that needed to be controlled for that we didn't control for. And I'm going to let you guys do the critique, because I think the critique is going to allow you to see where the problems really are. Now, in this study that I just sort of designed quickly, some of the problems that are glaringly obvious, hopefully, to you are issues that even when you try and control them in a serious manner, still remain problematic. And it's those, the lack of absolute control that you have over those variables that make this design, what am I trying to say? That make it so that when you conduct a correlational study like this, you can absolutely never say that one thing causes another thing. You can sort of rule out variables as being contributing factors, but you're not allowed to say that one thing causes another. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to show you is what my data would look like. So, and again, I'm going to hold this up here, and even blurry, you can see what I've said. Okay, and so variable 1, which is the on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you learn in a hands-on environment? You can see that from subject 1, I got a data point, 10, and from subject 1 again, I got a 3 for the other variable. So I'm collecting 2 pieces of information from each subject. So they're giving me a data point for each variable. Okay. And so this structure looks very different from what an experiment would look like. And just for the sake of making it clear, I didn't do it, so I'm gonna sketch it out really quickly. This would be hands-on, this would be lecture, and this would be a measure of learning. Okay, so in an experiment, okay, so this is what the setup would look like in an experiment, where your independent variable is up here, and your independent variable would be whether or not the students were in a hands-on condition or a lecture condition. And we would say this is level 1 of the independent variable and level 2 of the independent variable. And then we collect a measure of learning for both groups, and this would be the same exact measure, and that's our dependent variable. So what the studies look like when you lay out how you're collecting, like the structure of your data collection, they look very different. Okay. All right. Since I have 3 people here in this video for winter 2020, do you guys have any questions before I shut the video down? And I'm going to pause for just a little in case people are typing. And if you could just type me a yes, somebody quickly. If you do have a question, I can wait. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and stop. Okay, so I'm seeing nothing. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and shut down this video, and I will get it up in the bonus discussion. And it takes a little while to get the processing, but it will be up probably within the hour. And you can take a look at that bonus discussion over there. So I will stop there, and I will see you on the flip side.